Hello and boo to everybody. Little zombie October humor there. Thank you all for attending. Today we're going to be talking about finding zombie assets. As you can see on the screen, this lovely looking guy down here on the right, that's a self-portrait. Drive new levels of efficiency in the data center. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's go to slide 2. I don't have a lot of slides, but so zombie servers are an epidemic apparently. 1 in 3 servers is drawing power but not performing any function, according to a recent Stanford study. So you have to, you think about servers, and it's not just hardware, right? I mean, physical boxes anymore, because you have a lot of virtual machines running too. I think a lot of people don't go, well, virtual machine, do I really care? Well, yeah, of course, because if you spin up a virtual machine, it takes resources, which means ultimately it needs more power of the server, right? So you want to be able to track those things and get an understanding of it. So the nice thing about getting a handle on things like this, zombie servers or just hardware and infrastructure in general, is the fact that something like this can lead directly to something quantifiable, right? It's a number. You've got money being spent on power. If I cut it by X percent, right away you're going to save X dollars. So, it's a great thing for the boss to be able to go back and say, hey, we implemented a solution, or we got better spreadsheets, or we just track things better, whatever the case may be. Now we've been able to save over the last 6 months X dollars. So there's another stat down here, utilization of servers. So it's not just servers that might be out there not really being used, but also the utilization of the servers, right? You consolidate things, make them more, get more efficiencies out of the hardware that you have, which is a good thing. There's a little more blurb from McKinsey and Company here. On average, servers deliver only 6% of their maximum computing output. So we're not really taking getting the full value out of the hardware that we have. We just go, hey, let's buy another server. We've got this, especially servers back in the day, it was all about, I've got a new application I need to run. Let me buy new hardware. You didn't think about, hey, why don't I run the multiple applications on one piece of hardware? Of course, now we have a lot of virtual things, so it's a little different. But so you can save up to 30%, marked decrease in power consumption, cooling, resources, and so on, right? How will it save you money? How will NetTerrain? I should back up for a second, because I didn't introduce myself, and 2, what is this NetTerrain thing I'm speaking of here? So first, I'm Jason Sherman. I'm with Graphical Networks. Our main product we have is NetTerrain. Okay. NetTerrain is, you'll see it, I'll show it to you in a second here, allows you to track hardware, equipment, network documentation, DCIM, whatever you want to refer to it as, DCM, and so on. We have products for those areas which will help you sort of manage. So one of the areas can be certainly helping you save money from the standpoint of tracking down these assets that might not be in use or underutilized, right? This slide really talking about avoiding costs of certain things. So if you're trying to do power monitoring or management, one of the ways you can do that is with a smart PDU. Smart PDUs have a little bit higher price tag than just a regular PDU. So if you can stick to more of a regular PDU and get the information you need from that versus a smart PDU, it could save you some money. So that's what this is really kind of talking about. We're happy to talk in more detail about that at some point. Reduce cooling costs, right? You want to be able to track not just power, but certainly temperature, but of course they can go hand in hand, right? So if you want to do some formulas, an ROI formula for tracking power and money saved, some information here regarding that. We're happy to send you these slides. So cooling costs are lowered by raising the room temperatures through continuously monitoring devices for temperature issues, right? If you can raise your data center by a degree, it can save you quite a bit of money, depending on different factors, of course. Increase rack density. That's another thing people don't really think about is if I can pull equipment out, it means I have space for other equipment, more bigger switches, bigger routers, or just other equipment that I need to install. If you're not really tracking things efficiently or effectively, then the issue becomes space, right? I mean, it's pretty hard to just magically grow your data center, wiring closets, whatever it happens to be, overnight. You really need to plan for that. And certainly, if you can increase your rack density, it means you're not having to go out and buy more space, plan on moving and doing those types of things, which are very costly. So rack density is pretty important. We can certainly help you manage that and give you some ideas. So see it in action. So power and thermal data for racks, policy-based power capping, aggregation, IT power, and cross-platform. So let's look at NetTerrain. So I'm going to bring this over to my screen here and share. So NetTerrain, again, is our software. It's really a graphical type software, visualization software, however you want to view it. You have objects, and objects can have hierarchy and connections and so on. So those are all things you can sort of take advantage of in our tool. But what's our tool kind of look like and do? Well, as I mentioned, hierarchy allows you to drill down. So you can build, and you don't have to. This is not fixed. It's not like you have to have these different levels and layers, parent-child relationships, and so on. It's really kind of up to you and what you're doing. So in my case, I'm just going to drill down and go through physical layer. I'm inside Baltimore. I've got different buildings here. I can click on a building and see data about the building. I can double-click and drill down. See things like floors, pictures of the building, and so on. Double-click, drill down. And what does this have to do with, with power and temperature and rack utilization and so on? Well, from the standpoint of rack utilization, if I'm in a let's say a data center or a wiring closet, I can turn this background off, by the way, just so you can kind of see what you're looking at. So these are all cabinets for the most part, and then I've got some other equipment, some power, temperature, cooling, and so on. I also have sort of spread around here some other items or objects, webcam, sensors, and those are things you can monitor too, or have tie-ins with, or just grab data if you want to track data. But here I've got a cabinet. This speaks back to rack utilization, and it can speak back to power. You can weight. I can look at this data center, these cabinets specifically. I can look at them by rack utilization. You look on the left-hand side of the screen, it says rack utilization. Or I can switch it. I want to look at my cabinets by power percentage. Or maybe I want to do it by weight used, right? So rack utilization is the one we were talking about. Of course, well, power too. So we go back to rack use. What does that mean? Well, so we can track the utilization. We can go in here and say, okay, well, if I have equipment inside my cabinet and it's a full cabinet and I need to put more stuff in here, what do I do? Well, if it's equipment that's not needed anymore and you can figure that out, then you pull it out and you have 2 U's of space left. And you can do reports based on the racks and other things, right? So got a floating device here. Let me get rid of it. But we can also track power to the PDUs and track that power back to things like the circuit breaker panels. If you want to see the whole path, you can see where you're tracking your power to, from circuit breaker to PDUs and so on, where it actually connects to the equipment. All right. Why is that important? Well, again, back to power. If you want to be able to know where power is coming from, what's connected to what, this is another place where you can save some money, because if you do have very full racks, if you can get the most out of the rack density and get rid of equipment you don't need, it means that this equipment is freeing up space on your PDUs, right? So now I have a place to connect new equipment to. I don't have to go get another PDU. I don't have to buy more rack space and so on. So you need to be able to track those things, right? So we can aggregate the power. We can aggregate things like temperature and other things. And we can read that data from sensors, or we can read it directly from things like the PDUs, or we can read it from something like a server. And there's different ways of reading that information or gathering that data. One of the primary ways we do this, if we are using our EM module, we call it the environmental monitoring module, the one that's going to track power and temperature over time. If we're going to do that and find those devices that are not really being utilized, or ones that are just sitting idle for hours on end but power's turned on, we can use our EM module. What is that going to do? Well, that's what I'm bringing up on the screen now. Make sure I'm at 100% here, or a little under. So what's nice about this is no matter what the technology you have, we can go out and typically get readings from it. And we can do that using discovery process, and that discovery process can utilize different protocols. So for instance, SNMP you might want to use, or IPMI, or HTTP, or SSH. So it depends, of course, on the device that you're monitoring. In the case of a server, if you monitor IPMI, you can get a lot of information about the server. You can actually control the server, power it on, power it off. If it's a PDU, you can monitor SNMP data. Depending on the PDU, you might get the power for each actual, power connection or port connection. So everything that plugs into port 1 or port 2 of the PDU you can monitor individually or as an aggregate. So we allow you to do that discovery and bring that data back. But we can also look at all our devices. We can place those devices, just like I did in NetTerrain. Using this module, I can place the devices in the racks and so on. But the data for these devices, if I go click on a device, I can monitor the data in a lot of detail. In the case of a server, I can get the information about the server. What is the device server? What's its power rating? Firmware versions and other things. And then I can also track information over time. What do I want to see? Well, over time, in this case, I'm going to be tracking the per hour power. So what's the power draw of this device over time? And you can see it sort of fluctuating a little bit, but you also see exactly how much power it's been using over time on average, and down here you can start to see how much energy it's consuming over a specific period of time. So if I want to look at it for the day, I can do that, or if I want to look at it for the week or the month, right? For the month, whoa, we had some out-of-band event going on here. What was that? So it's something you might have to investigate and see. But, obviously got some heavy use there, or something was going on with the power, so you'd want to check into that. So you can track these things over time. Over here on the left, you can also start to gather data about the device from the different sensors that are built into the device. In this case, again, it's a server, so there's lots of temperature sensors. There's information about all the different CPUs. There could be information about the fans, power supplies, and so on, right? Depending on, again, what it is you're sort of tracking. So, and if you also want to monitor in this case, the servers for changes in state from the standpoint of, hey, you do have a bad fan, or you do have a power supply that's starting to look flaky. It can also monitor for those types of items too. But the primary purpose is really the power and temperature over time. So we can start to track that information. And that data, we can come in here and look at it and see what it looks like. But this data can also be fed directly to the devices in your cabinets inside of NetTerrain, so you capture the data as a data field. And it's on a regular basis. This is running and capturing data, and then on a regular basis you can update that information. So you always kind of know where you're at with respect to it. Depending on the device type, especially if it's, again, a server IPMI-based device protocol, you can power the device on through the interface. You can power it off. You reconnect to it. You can control power as well. So one of the nice things about the tool is you do have the ability to come in and actually say, I want to put a cap on this device. So if you don't want it to exceed a certain power usage, you don't want it to go above 225 watts ever, you could put a cap on it. Okay? So maybe weekends you threshold it even lower, because it's not really in use, so you don't want to go above that. So you can have a better control over the power for some of your devices. Now, it doesn't have to be just servers. It could be, again, PDUs and other things. You're not going to necessarily control power on and off of the PDUs, but certainly you can trend the power and temperature over time if they have those sensors and those values, depending on how you're going to monitor those tools. After you start to capture all the information, you can start to look at things as an aggregate. I want to see my rack. I want to see power for the whole rack. I want to see power for the whole room. I want to see power for the whole data center. What's in use? How much is the data center costing me day in and day out? What are the devices using the most power? What are the devices using very little power over time? That's usually going to tell you that those are devices that probably don't need to be turned on or in use. Okay? So those are all things you can start to track. So with all this information you're capturing data-wise, you can start to make better decisions about your environment. But first and foremost, start to kick out devices that aren't really in use and help you better utilize the devices you do have. So you can put more workloads on some of the servers, and you can track them better. So if you do put a workload on a server, you can see how it impacts the power and temperature of that particular server. Right? So all things you can do. Anyway. I'm going to stop talking now, see if there's any questions, and if not, we will can end this webinar. But yeah, let me see if there's any questions out there first. Let me go to questions. Give you guys a minute to post. Yeah, I don't see any questions. Oh, wait, here they come. It always takes a minute for those to come out. Let me move this out. Can you see power utilization in a data center view? Yes, you can. Either you can do it here as an overview of the whole data center, and you can see the power utilization as a whole. You also have other abilities to go in and do cooling analysis and some other things, power and so on, sort of against industry standards. But you can view it here. You can also do an aggregation in NetTerrain itself. You can aggregate all the racks and have one number rolled up as well. So those are all things you can definitely do with our tool. Oh, how do you discover the power in the sensors? Again, depending on the devices, it's either going to be SNMP, IPMI. If I go over here and add a discovery process, sorry, that's a wrong thing. Add a discovery task, I can choose different protocols to discover. Typically, servers are going to be IPMI with the EM tool or SNMP. PDUs are typically SNMP or SSH. Sometimes it's HTTPS, and then there's a few other protocols there too, but they're more outliers than anything. Let's see. What is doing the monitoring? Where is the data being kept? Cloud-based. So with our EM, the EM is really not meant to be cloud-based. It's really meant to be really on-site, on-prem, because it does have to talk to the devices internally of your equipment, right? So if it's going to talk to your rack servers or PDUs, it has to have access to those. So really, my customers, they're using EM. They have it on site in a server and just connect that way. So they're going to connect directly to that information. So I hope that answers your question. And the data being kept, the data would be kept, on the server wherever you install this. But again, this wouldn't be cloud-based. If I have smart PDUs, can the train discover this through SNMP? Yeah, typically, it depends on the smart PDU. Most my experience with my customers is most PDUs are SNMP enabled or can be SNMP enabled, and that's where you would pull the data for those, the values that you might want to get. And that could be an aggregate for the whole PDU, or it could be individual, the ports, a per port reading as well. So if you're looking at a PDU that's got 24 power connections, then each power connection point would have its own sensor for readings. So, or it could, depends on your PDU again. But the interest is usually the roll up. You want to see as a whole what's the power being drawn. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you need to monitor things. If I have smart PD, we covered that one. Oh, trial. Yeah, we do have trials. So certainly for NetTerrain, For the EM, you can have access to this EM dashboard and kind of play around with it. If you need to install this locally in your environment, you just have to talk to one of the sales folks, and they can work that out with you. That's not typical, but sometimes that you need to try things out. So we're always open to that. Anyway, don't see any more questions, so I want to thank everybody for your time. And if you do have more questions, just email us or call us. Happy to talk to you. Just answer whatever questions you might have, and kind of go from there. See if it's the right fit. So thanks everybody. Appreciate your time.